Today we're cooking some quick meals that take 20 minutes or less. All the recipes have minimal chopping and I'll be giving you some top tips throughout the video on how to be a more efficient cook. So for our first recipe, we'll be making soba noodle salad with some crispy 5-spice tofu. We'll start this recipe by getting the 5-spice tofu ready as it takes the longest to cook. I'm using some extra firm tofu as you don't really need to do anything to it. Just pat it dry and then we're going to tear it into bite-sized chunks. I prefer to prepare the tofu like this as you get a nice rough outside which is going to get really crispy compared to if you were to just cut it into cubes. We're then going to drizzle over some toasted sesame oil which has a really nutty flavour and just toss it over the tofu to get it nice and covered. Then add some arrowroot powder or cornflour and just toss to coat once again. Chinese 5-spice contains aniseed, fennel, cloves, cinnamon and pepper, and it's going to add a lovely fragrant flavour to the tofu. When trying to cook quickly, using these spice mixes is a great way to save some time. Simply sprinkle over your tofu with the salt and then we're going to mix to coat it. I'm going to be air frying the tofu as it's really efficient and it also means you can kind of just walk away from it and leave it to do its thing while you get on with the rest of the recipe. We've only got a little bit of chopping to do in this recipe, starting with a thinly sliced red pepper. As always, the full recipes will be in the description box of the video. You can use any vegetables in a salad, but I like to use some nice crunchy ones, so for some alternatives, you could use carrot, celery, or some red cabbage for example. Get your red pepper into a bowl. This is going to be the bowl that we combine everything together in at the end. Then, as always, make sure your chopping board is nice and clean. I've then got some purple sprouting broccoli which is in season at the moment, so it's lovely and fresh, and I'm just going to cut it into bite-sized pieces, fairly small, as we'll be cooking it with the noodles at the same time. We'll then prepare the dressing, starting with some fresh ginger. I like to use a teaspoon to remove the skin, just makes it really easy, you can get into all the gaps and that sort of thing. I don't always take the skin off if I'm going to cook the ginger, but since it's a dressing, I do like to remove it. I'm also going to add a clove of garlic to the dressing and we're just going to peel it but not crush it as we're going to be zesting it in. Into a bowl or jug, add some chili jam. This is going to add some sweetness but also a little spiciness for the dressing. We're then going to add the juice of 1 lime for some freshness. You can add the zest of lime as well if you want, or I like to zest it onto the noodles once it's plated. We're then going to grate in some garlic and that ginger. You can buy pre-grated garlic and ginger in the supermarkets, but in my opinion, fresh is always best and it doesn't really take that long. Next we'll add some of this lovely golden toasted sesame oil plus some soy sauce for that salty umami flavour. Whisk it together and that is your dressing ready to go for your noodles. I'll also be adding some frozen sweet corn and broad beans to this noodle dish which I've just defrosted with some boiling water. So bring a pan of water to the boil, add your soba noodles, and once they start to sink down, you can get in there with your tongs and sort of twist them into the water. Soba noodles are made of buckwheat, they're gluten-free, protein and fibre rich, and they cook between around 4 and 8 minutes depending on the brand. So about halfway through the cooking, we're going to add in the broccoli, followed by our frozen vegetables which we've defrosted. I like to pre-defrost the vegetables as otherwise when you add them it's just going to completely zap the heat out of the pan and it's going to really mess with your cooking times. We're then going to wash the soba noodles under cold water, and this is to get rid of all the starch but also keep the green vegetables nice and bright. Add your noodles and the veg to the bowl with the red pepper and then we're going to pour over that delicious dressing. Give it a good mix with your tongs or just give it a toss until everything is nice and coated in that lovely dressing. So many vibrant colours, you've got the yellow, the green, the red, really nice fresh dinner or lunch. After around 12 to 15 minutes in the air fryer, you'll have lovely golden crispy tofu which is going to go perfect with that noodle salad. Plate up your noodles and top with that crispy tofu. Sometimes I'll drizzle over a little extra chili jam now and enjoy. Really good. It's really fresh and then you've got heat from the chili jam and the ginger. The tofu is really crispy and then you've got that fragrant 5-spice seasoning on it. This is a perfect quick meal if you want something a bit lighter for your lunch or dinner. The next recipe we're making is an Orzo carbonara with tempeh bacon, peas and cavolo nero. First we'll combine some ingredients for the liquid mixture that we're going to cook the Orzo in, starting with some vegetable stock, then some plant milk, next some nutritional yeast for that cheesy nutty flavour. This is kala namak and it will give the mix a slightly eggy flavour since carbonara typically has egg yolks in. Feel free to leave it out if you don't want it. We've then got some English mustard for a little bit of spice and we're going to add a good grinding of black pepper. Whisk this together, we've then got a short bit of vegetable prep. Starting with one onion, which we're actually going to grate, as this is going to mean it cooks super quickly. Just be careful when grating it, as it can get a little slippery and you don't want to cut yourself. You can of course finely chop the onion if you want to. With the onion we're going to finely chop some fresh thyme. You can also use dried herbs if you like. We'll then add a couple cloves of garlic. A quick way to get the peel off is to just cut a little line down the clove and then it'll come off really easily. We're just going to zest that into the onion and thyme mixture. We're going to be using another seasonal vegetable, and that is cavolo nero, also called black kale, Italian kale, sometimes even dinosaur kale. It's got many names, but anyway, to prepare it we're just going to pull off the leaves from the stalk. I won't be using the stalks in this recipe, but I do use them in stir fries or in stews. They can be a little bit tough, but if you cook them enough they will become soft eventually. So we're just going to remove all the leaves from the stalks and roughly chop it, ready to go into our Orzo carbonara. Make sure to give it a wash as well before you use it. When I'm making a risotto dish or a pasta dish, which typically isn't super healthy, I do like to add in some green vegetables to boost the nutrients. Start by heating up some olive oil. We're then going to add the onion, thyme and garlic and just saute it for a couple of minutes. It'll cook really quickly because it's all zested or chopped nice and small. I want this dish to be nice and indulgent, so I'm just going to add a little butter to cook the onion and garlic in. We'll then add the orzo. I've always called it rasta as it's like a mix between pasta and rice, and we're just going to coat it in all that butter, onion and garlicky goodness. Orzo cooks very quickly in around 8 to 10 minutes, but it does have a tendency to stick to the bottom of the pan, so you do have to stir it fairly often during the cooking. Add in your liquid and bring to a simmer, and we're just going to cook it for around 8 to 10 minutes until the orzo is al dente, which means it still has a slight bite to it. Add in the cavolo nero about halfway through the cooking of the orzo. It is quite a tough vegetable, so it will take at least 4 minutes to cook and become nice and soft. Stir in your kale so it's all nice and combined. Feel free to add some more vegetable stock if the pan starts to look a little bit dry. I'm then going to add in some frozen peas for another vegetable. The orzo is going to soak up that cheesy, savoury liquid, and as you stir it around it's going to release its starch and create a lovely creamy orzo risotto. I'm also going to add a squeeze of lemon juice to bring out the other flavours and cut through the creaminess. We'll now make the smoky tempeh bacon chunks, which as well as adding some amazing texture and flavour, will also add a good protein boost to this dish. We'll start by making the glaze for the tempeh, which is going to have light soy sauce, dark soy sauce, some maple syrup for sweetness, then we've got 2 spices, some ground cumin and some smoked paprika. Give it a whisk and that is ready to go. For the tempeh, you can either crumble it into chunks or you can cut it into cubes like I'm doing here. If you don't like tempeh, which is perfectly understandable, then you can use some tofu or even some beans would work. Coat the tempeh in some oil. We'll then add some cornflour and just stir this in so it's all nice and coated. This is going to get the tempeh nice and crispy. In a medium frying pan, we're going to heat up a little oil and we're going to fry the tempeh until golden and crispy. We'll then pour over that glaze and coat the tempeh in it. You can make this in the air fryer or the oven, which is a good way to multitask as you can cook it while you're making the orzo risotto. You've now got beautiful smoky glazed tempeh chunks ready to go on top of your orzo. Serve it up and enjoy. I'm also going to sprinkle over a little extra nutritional yeast, or you could add some vegan parmesan. That is really good. It's creamy and indulgent, but with bursts of freshness from the peas and the kale, and you've got the smoky umami tempeh for another layer of texture. This is perfect for a cold night in when you want something warm and cozy. Last but not least, we're going to make a lovely creamy spicy dhal, and we're going to start by finely dicing 1 onion, then we're going to finely chop some coriander ready to go on later. I like to chop herbs by just rolling them up and running my knife through them. You can then do the cross chop if you want them a little finer. Instead of using a can of coconut cream, I'm going to be using this creamed coconut, which is kind of chalky and it will just sort of melt into your dish. It's a nice way of adding some coconut without it being too overwhelmingly coconutty. In a large saucepan, we're going to heat up a tablespoon of oil, followed by a tablespoon of mustard seeds. Once they start popping, you can add in your onion. Saute your onion for a couple of minutes. This is where it's important that you finely chop your onion. You could also use the grating technique as it really helps with speeding up the cooking time. I'm going to add some grated ginger. To save time, I'm not going to peel it, I'm just going to grate it in and it'll cook into the dish. Pretty much going to grate this until my hand gets tired, as I want this dish to have a really nice gingery kick. With the same zester, we're going to add in some garlic as well. Fry this off for a couple of minutes. We're then going to add a couple of spices, starting with some cardamom. I've got some green cardamom here, but you can also get black cardamom, which has a more sort of smoky, piney flavour. Or as we're doing a quick meal today, I'm going to cheat and use some ground cardamom. Followed by some turmeric for that lovely golden colour, then some sweet paprika. We've also got some Kashmiri chili powder, which is a really nice chili. It's not too spicy, but it adds a lovely colour. We've then got some garam masala, and I always like to add a little bit of oil to just bring out the flavours from the spices. Next, a can of chopped tomatoes. Always wash your can out so there's no wastage. I'm then going to use a fork to quickly crush up the tomatoes, as we're not going to be cooking this dal for ages. Next, I'll add the cream coconut, which is going to slowly melt into the sauce, followed by the red lentils and then the vegetable stock. One tip to cook this dal really quickly is to soak your red lentils. You wouldn't typically soak them as they don't really take that long to cook, but it does take a good 5-10 minutes off the cooking time. Cook your dal for around 15 to 20 minutes over a medium heat. Give it a good stir every now and again just to make sure nothing's sticking. I'm then going to add some lime juice just to freshen it up a little bit. Give it a stir and see if it needs any seasoning like salt and pepper. Sometimes I'll add some soy sauce, which adds a really nice deep umami flavour. It's not particularly traditional, but I find soy sauce is great for seasoning things like stews, curries, and dishes like this. Finish the dal with some fresh coriander, or if you don't like coriander, some parsley. We'll then stir in a good handful of fresh spinach, and that is going to be your dal done and dusted. Serve it up with some vegan yogurt, a sprinkle of chili flakes, a little extra coriander if you want it, and then I'm going to enjoy it with some flatbread. Some mango chutney would be really nice as well, and I hope you enjoy. Delicious. Dal is another great one for when it's cold outside and you want a nice bowl of warming food. It's creamy, but then you've also got bursts of spicy mustard seeds. It's nutritious, easy to make, and really tasty, so definitely give this one a go. If you enjoyed this video, then check out this one for more plant-based goodness.